We've been on this journey of transformation, of endeavoring to become emotionally healthy so that we can have an emotionally healthy spirituality. And it's been a wonderful journey. It's based on a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by author named Peter Scazzero. I believe he's based out of New York. And it's just interesting, and it's reaffirming and reiterating a lot of the things that I've learned in my own life personally about how to grow as an individual, grow in character, grow in virtue. And one of the main things you have to do is you have to gain self-knowledge. You have to look inwardly. You have to understand who you are, why you do the things that you do, right? Why do I what triggers me? What are the different emotions that I feel, and why does that happen, and where do they come from? And that's what we sort of were looking at these past previous two Sundays. We asked the question, what sort of internal conflicts or problems might be inside of each of us that is going to be a barrier or prevent me from getting closer to God and growing in emotional health. And last week we really zeroed in on that and said, how do we get to know ourselves, and what is our true self? Is our true self simply just the mask or the persona that we put on for others? You know, we often will live by other people's expectations. And, you know, I said this a few times last week, and I'll say it again. You know, to a degree, that's normal and healthy if you're going to live in a community, if you're going to live in a society, or live in a marriage, or live in a family, whatever it might be. Whenever you're around other people, you do have to be aware of what their expectations are and how to get along and not just live for yourself, of course. You can't be completely selfish and you know, get along with others. That just doesn't work. You have to live within yourself, you know, use your self-interest to work with others. But there is a point at which you begin to put a mask on, you put on a persona, and suddenly you're no longer the true you. You are, again, you're living out a version of you that is really just living out, you know, living for other people's expectations of you. Your expectations as perhaps a parent or a spouse, or in your job situation or your school situation, or even just who you're supposed to be with your friends, or whoever it might be, right? But that's not our true self, and our true self is the version of us, the true version of us that God has created, our unique, the unique you. You know, I'm the only Daniel Calcagno in the world, so to speak. Not literally in terms of the name, but but in terms of this person here, I'm the only one, and you are the only you in the world. And you have a responsibility and you know, a privilege, if you will, to live out the true version of you, which is the version that God has created and God has equipped to be a special person and to be you know, somebody in this world who can only be you and only give this world the gifts that you have to give. So that's important. That's special. But again, if we're not going to be able to reveal and really get to know our true self and live out our true self unless we dig back into our past. And that's what today's message is all about. It's called The Power of the Past. And it's really, the longer title is called Breaking the Power of the Past. And the sort of idea is that we each carry with us baggage from our past. And the book, and Scazzero goes on in the book, and he's really talking about family. You know, not just our experiences growing up, but literally in terms of what we've inherited biologically. And, you know, the area of evolutionary biology, the idea that humanity has survived and adapted, and we've passed on certain traits to descendants, and these, you know, we are currently the descendants of all those who have come before us. And so, you know, we have inherited so much of who we are from those who have gone before us, our ancestors, so to speak. And, you know, I like to think of myself as an individualist, that every person is an individual. I just sort of went on about that, right? And that's true. Every person is responsible for themselves, and every person is deserving of certain inalienable rights, as the U.S. Declaration of Independence says. But the idea is that that's not really a full picture of who we are as individuals. Individual people are a product of, let's say, decades, centuries, millennia, more of people, producing and passing down traits to get to us, right? And so within each of us, there's so much that I don't even know. There's a lot of things buried in my unconscious. So we have to sort of unpack that. We have to have God help us, and as I was saying this morning, as I was talking about this, there's a lot of things that we've inherited from our parents and from our heritage that are good, and we should celebrate that. We should thank God for the good things, the perhaps a strong sense of discipline, perhaps a strong sense of morality. These might be things that we've inherited, even on a biological level, but certainly in terms of the whole nature versus nurture argument. If not nature, then at least nurture. We've been brought up with certain virtues that are good, and we should celebrate those. But there are also things that aren't so good that we've inherited, right? Perhaps unchecked anger, perhaps certain addictions, or certain voids, or lack of responsibility. These are certain things that we've sort of inherited, again, either biologically or by the way that we were treated growing up and how we were raised. And these are things that, we carry with us. In fact, the Bible kind of sort of gets at it by referring, or at least it doesn't necessarily directly refer to this concept, but in Christianity we call it the sinful nature. And there's lots of debate about, the sinful nature, original sin, and all those sort of things. And in fact, there's a verse, Romans chapter 5, verse 19. It says, because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. And Paul is referring to Adam, as in Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis. And this, I bring this verse up not to get hung up on, again, the theological issues or even the issue of, the different viewpoints regarding a historical Adam. That's not the point. The point is this, is that the Bible presents a truth here. In some sense, sin has been passed down from generation to generation, in some sense. Scazzero actually says family patterns from the past are played out in our present relationships without us necessarily being aware of it. That's what I was referring to when I said there are things that are unconscious in me, in each of us, that we're not even aware of, that we've inherited, right? So since much of who we are and why we do what we do is inherited and unconscious, we have to do the hard work to get real with ourselves. Getting real with ourselves, right? Scazzero says in the book, emotionally healthy spirituality is about reality. It's not about denial or illusion. It's about reality. And the reality is that we are who we are based on the family we were born into, and we had no choice in the matter, right? Sad to say, we didn't have a choice in to whom we were born and where we were born and all those sort of things. So rather than try to run from that reality, we should try to face that reality. Because here's the truth, that there is no getting away from this, right? We all unconsciously live out what we've inherited from or learned from our families. And so we have to ask these questions. If we're going to ask these questions like I've been encouraging you these past couple weeks, why do I feel the things that I feel? Why do I do the things that I do? Where do they come from? Why do I react in certain ways, right? If we're going to ask those questions, then we have to ask this question, which is it possible that I'm simply living out what I've inherited or learned from my family, right? And why would we ask that? So that we can make a distinction between the false self and the true self, that which is healthy and that which is unhealthy, right? Again, like I said, we can be grateful for the good things that we've inherited, but we've also inherited things that aren't so good, and we need to break that power that those things have in our lives. Scazzero says this, and I bolded it here in my notes so that, this is an important point. True spirituality frees us to live joyfully in the present. Let me say that again. True spirituality, which we're endeavoring to have, true spirituality, not some, fake spirituality that is just showy. No, true internal inward spirituality frees us. It frees us so that we can joyfully live in the present and not be stuck in the past. And Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, he said, and he put it as an imperative. He said, you, me, each of us, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt. So think of like a t-shirt. Pull off the old self and put on the new self, which is created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So there is that new self, that true self that God has created inside of us that he wants us to see, burst free and have us live out. And we do, again, and I've said this before, but this is so important. We have to find the balance between understanding God is gracious toward us and that he is the one who gives us salvation, and we just sort of have to embrace that. There's nothing we can do to earn his love or earn his grace and his salvation. But there's also the choice we have to make, the diligent choice actually, that we have to make in order to grow and change. So we have to balance that. And again, because Paul said that you need to put off your old self, you need to put on your new self, that means that we have to make a choice. And we have to get to know ourselves in order to know whether or not we've inherited some things from our past, from our family, that aren't so good. And there are several untruths or several falsehoods that Scazzero presents in the book that I just want to touch on here. And he said this: each of our family members or those who raised us through childhood has imprinted certain ways of behaving and thinking into us. So again, our family and how we were raised has imprinted, most of the time unconsciously, certain ways of behaving and thinking into us. So we have to explore what those might be, and assess whether or not they're good or bad, and keep the good and throw away the bad. So let me just list these examples that he gives us and maybe touch on them just a little bit. For example, how we deal with money, resources, how we survive. Is money the best source of security? I know certainly he mentions him being Italian, and I'm Italian. There's a certain attitude in European culture, Italian culture at least, of you have to get a good job, you have to make money. Now, and there's a truth in that. You do have to provide for your family. You do have to, sustain yourself and be productive, of course. But is that your source of security? Is that where you, what you put your hope and what you rest in? Is that how you prove that you've made it when you have a career or when you've made a lot of money? These are things that we might have inherited from our family culture, and the way we were raised growing up, that we have to assess, and we have to realize maybe that's where some of my emotional triggers come from, is how I was, what's inside of me and how I was taught about money. And it goes on. I'll just touch on the rest of these here. Conflict, how we and often will have learned and inherited the trait to avoid conflict. And that's actually, pretty normal in all human beings. None of us loves conflict, but we are afraid. We don't want people to get mad at us. We don't want, we think that simply arguing or simply debating is conflict or is something to be avoided, even though that's how you get to, and by negotiating is how you get to peaceful solutions. So we have to assess that. We have to think and think about that and keep the good and throw away the bad. How we think about sex and relationships. How we have false ideas about what is attractive, how we have false ideas about what is a good partner. If a partner is good looking, then that's good enough. It's like, that's not going to get you very far, right? And there's certain things that we have in our minds consciously and unconsciously about relationships that we've inherited from our families that we really, and like, we see the way our parents related to one another. A lot of you might have had parents who divorced or who fought all the time or whatever it is, and we see that we've inherited that in some way, and we need to really assess that and make sure we don't continue that pattern. Grief and loss, right? To a lot of people, and especially from a male perspective, sadness is a sign of weakness, or if you're depressed, then something must be wrong with you, or get over it. You don't give yourself time to process grief and loss or mourn. These are all things that we learn from our family that we need to think about, right? Similarly, expressing anger. Anger, we think, because we've been taught or we've seen, anger is bad, but the reality is that anger is not bad. Anger is a neutral emotion that can actually be a tool to help you do the right thing, right? You can get angry about something and then use that to do the right thing. But don't get me wrong, lots of people, myself included, get angry and sometimes do the wrong thing, right? But that's not what it should be or what we could be doing. But we often have examples of people in our lives, and especially maybe perhaps traits we've inherited that don't allow us or it makes it very difficult for us to use anger in that positive way. What about the idea of family itself? Again, coming from a European Italian background myself, family's everything. Regardless of what that means on a moral level or a virtuous level. You watch those mafia movies or whatever, and it's all about family. It's like, meanwhile, they're horrible, murderous people. It's like, good for you and your high moral standards about family when it's not assessed in any sort of moral way. Anyway, there are a lot of different misunderstandings and false ideas that we have about family that we inherit, and we need to reassess those. Similarly, he mentions, again, relationships, attitudes towards different cultures, that is perhaps being racist or perhaps, just not being open-minded and all these sort of things. What about the idea of success, that unless you perhaps go to get an education or you get a good job, or if you, let's say you don't have those things, or you don't get married and don't have children and don't do this and this and this, whatever our families and society says we have to do, then we're not successful, and therefore we're not really worthy of love, or worthy as a person. And lastly, feelings and emotions themselves, right? We tend to inherit lots of weird and not healthy and not helpful things about emotions, what they are, how we can be aware of them, how we can use them for good instead of bad. Lots of different misunderstandings. So there is sort of a list of different things that we again inherit from our families, or are taught from our families growing up, our families of origin, and that is what it is, right? We have to be honest and just accept and embrace, if you will, who we are as a result of who we are in terms of our heritage. But the great news, the good news, the gospel message is that we don't have to, be stuck in our family of origin. We can actually be a part of a new family, which is the family of God, which is all those who have decided to say, I'm no longer going to live that false self. I'm going to live out the new self, the true self, the self that God has created. Live in the freedom that brings, right? We're going to be a part of the kingdom of God, which is a whole new way of looking at life, a whole new way of looking at existence, human existence and human society. It's a wonderful thing. It's a freeing thing, as I said. So if you feel like perhaps, and I think all of us, like I alluded to earlier, we all have baggage that we have as a result of our heritage and how we were raised and all that. But we all have a great choice before us to start a new family. Again, maybe literally in terms of like what I'm doing with my wife, and we're having children, and we're, we have a new family, and like that doesn't mean that you can't include members of your family of origin in your new family. Of course you can. but there has to be a certain, there has to be evidence that the people that you're including in your life are on the same path as you, that they are looking towards growth and emotionally healthy spirituality as well. So that's what it's all about. Building a new family, either as a church family, and I welcome you, those of you who are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, that we have a wonderful church family at Glad Tidings in Fonthill. So if you're local, I really hope you can join us once we start meeting in person again. But of course, as we now have this online presence, and this is really going to be the way, in addition to meeting in person again one day, we're going to maintain this online presence. And so you are welcome to join us as a church, join our church in that way online. And so you're more than welcome to join us and to participate in our Sunday morning gatherings, in our Bible studies, engage in prayer or give financially, or give in volunteer ways, however you want to help us out and however you want to come together with us. You can be a part of our church family. And certainly you can be part of the family of God, the worldwide, if you will, family of God. But also you can choose to create your own new family in your life. Either, like I said, literally with a new immediate family through marriage and children, or at least through the sphere of influence that you have, that your friends and the people that you have in your life. You can treat one another well. You can be kind to one another. You can love each other, and be all that we can be, that God wants us to be. We can break the power of the past. So I'm so excited about that.